Tonight, the fate of a nation in the hands of two other nations. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin discuss Ukraine on the phone, agreeing to a limited ceasefire. It falls short, though, of a blanket 30-day truce agreed between the US and Ukraine. Still, President Zelensky gives cautious support for stopping energy attacks as he seeks more information from President Trump. Also tonight, the Israeli Prime Minister warns that Gaza airstrikes are only the beginning after attacks said to have killed 400 people.
From now on, Israel will act against Hamas with increasing intensity, and from now on, negotiations will only take place under fire.
And live in this programme, back down to Earth, two astronauts who were stuck in space for 9 months are less than an hour from their scheduled splashdown. Hello there, good evening. This was Donald Trump's moment to show himself as a statesman and deal maker who could, as he's promised, end the war in Ukraine. Instead, during a lengthy phone call, Russia's Vladimir Putin rejected Trump's push for a full ceasefire, agreeing only to stop attacks like this on Ukrainian energy targets for 30 days. But it's a start. Putin also told Trump that Russia and Ukraine are to exchange 175 prisoners of war tomorrow. And on a somewhat lighter note, suggested America and Russia organise ice hockey matches. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 miles away from Ukraine, another ceasefire is unravelling after Israel pounded Gaza with airstrikes. It poses threats to President Trump's hopes for peace there, as Israel threatens more to come.
From now on, Israel will act against Hamas with increasing intensity, and from now on, negotiations will only take place under fire. Hamas has already felt our might in the last 24 hours, and I want to assure you this is just the beginning.
We will have more from Jerusalem shortly, but we begin with the Trump-Putin phone call and this report from our US correspondent, Mark Stone. We'll get to that in just a moment, but in the meantime, let's head to Moscow and speak to Ivor Bennett. So, Ivor, how does this phone call and the agreements take us forward? And will the Russians be happy with this? Because presumably that limited ceasefire will help prevent Ukrainian attacks on their energy infrastructure.
Yeah, good evening, Anna. So the Kremlin has described this phone call as a detailed and frank exchange of views. And I think Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin will be pretty satisfied with how it's gone, actually, for a number of reasons. Because first and foremost, Vladimir Putin has avoided upsetting Donald Trump and incurring his wrath. He didn't want to jeopardize the wider US-Russia rapprochement that's going on, which is important to Moscow because there's talk of lifting sanctions on Russia. If he hadn't agreed to some kind of ceasefire, well, he could have risked all of that. But it seems he's given Donald Trump enough by agreeing to this 30-day ceasefire on energy infrastructure to ensure that that wider reset of relations remains on course. And in the Kremlin's readout of the call, there's lots of talk about how the pair discussed the importance of normalizing bilateral relations. So that's on course. Secondly, Russia's red lines remain intact, it seems. He didn't want to, or he wouldn't have wanted to agree to something that would have seen those watered down, particularly regarding Russia's own security concerns regarding NATO. And it seems they remain as indelible as ever because, again, in Moscow's readout of the call, its communique, it says that Putin made clear that a final resolution needs to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. That's a phrase we've heard a lot recently, of course. And in Putin's eyes, these root causes are NATO expansion. So he's saying there that Moscow still wants guarantees that Ukraine will never join the bloc. The third thing that Moscow's got from this is the room to maneuver still on the battlefield. He can still make the most of Moscow's military advantage and still bank territory as much as he can before there's any kind of ceasefire. And it's particularly important in the Kursk region, Russia's own Kursk region, its own territory, where Putin is desperate to wipe out finally Ukraine's incursion there, its foothold there. It's been going on for 7 months. It seems that's now within grasp. He wants to make the most of that advantage and press it home. And the final reason why they'll be happy is because it gives the Kremlin a narrative to sell here. Vladimir Putin likes to cast Russia as the peacemaker, Europe and Ukraine as a warmonger, and by agreeing to some kind of ceasefire, well, it allows him to reinforce that. And we're seeing proof of Moscow's satisfaction tonight on social media in the form of a post from Kremlin envoy Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, so essentially Vladimir Putin's money man. He's written, under the leadership of President Putin and President Trump, the world has become a much safer place today. Historic, exclamation mark, epic, exclamation mark. I think Ukraine and Europe will be highly sceptical, though, that Vladimir Putin is to thank for that.
Very interesting. Ivor, live for us there in Moscow. Thank you. Well, let's get more detail, rather, on the day itself and head to our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
It was, but not before a little delay. The White House may have been ready, but in Moscow, not quite. A power play, maybe, from President Putin, still on stage at the time set for the call with Donald Trump. The moderator reminding the president of his call, but he was in no hurry. It got underway shortly after, behind closed doors, and it lasted around 2 hours. Then a statement online from the American president. My conversation today with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure, with an understanding that we will be working quickly to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine, he said. The Russian interpretation said the call represented a detailed and frank exchange of views. The official readout following the call said, in the context of the US president's initiative to introduce a 30-day truce, the Russian side outlined a number of significant points. It was emphasized that the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution by political and diplomatic means should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence mutual striking infrastructure facilities for 30 days. Immediately gave the Russian military the corresponding order. In short, then, days ago, Russia has not committing to the bare minimum because Putin believes he is winning this war. He has the upper hand and he wants to continue fighting along that long front line. And with good reason from his perspective. This is a war about territory and he wants as much of it as possible before committing to a stop. President Zelensky was in the far west of Ukraine today, a ceremony honouring the dead in this war.
We support all steps towards ending the war. We will give support, but in order to support something, we need to understand what specifically it is. If President Trump can find time, he is a busy man. If he has time, he can phone at any time. We are ready to pick up. We are ready to discuss the next steps with him.
Zelensky was scolded for telling Donald Trump not to trust Putin. Tonight, to the east of here, the sirens are blaring again. No pause by Russia, even after that phone call commitment. Mark Stone, Sky News, at the White House.
Well, let's bring in Mark now. So hailed by the White House, as we would expect, Mark, but the Russians are still making what would be seen as intolerable demands of the Ukrainians.
Yeah, look, Anna, I think if Donald Trump had seen today as a demonstrable and big success, then we'd have seen him, and we haven't. He's been signing executive orders in the Oval Office. We know that these moments are moments he likes to invite in the cameras and to make very public, and if he wants to make statements about the news of the day and his successes of the day. But as yet, we've not heard from him. We may do later. He's due to do an interview with Fox News later tonight. So we'll see what that brings. But I think, you know, plainly today has been a difficult day for a man who likes to be seen as a peacemaker, who wants to be seen as a peacemaker. Yes, he's moved the dial a little bit on the Ukraine conflict. He has got Vladimir Putin to commit to a tiny bit of a ceasefire, although it must be said that for Putin to stop striking energy facilities as the summer comes in Ukraine, well, he doesn't need to strike energy facilities, because the reason he's doing that is to put pressure on civilians in the cold winter of Ukraine. As we get to summer, that is less of a priority for his. He wants to continue fighting on the front line, as I outlined in my report, because he thinks he's winning. And so Putin has given Trump today the bare minimum of what he could have done. Remember, Ukraine, on the other hand, has committed to a full 30-day truce, albeit because the Americans put an awful lot of pressure on Ukraine, pressure that we have not seen them put on Russia. You may be able to hear the chanting outside the gates of the White House here, a massive Palestinian flag flying, a reminder that today has been, as I say, difficult for Donald Trump, because whether it be the Ukraine war, where he has not got the full ceasefire he asked for, or whether it be the Middle East, which is unraveling once again, this is not the day of the peacemaker as he would like it to be.
Indeed not. Mark, live for us there at the White House. Thank you. Well, our security and defence analyst Michael Clark looks more closely at what came out of that phone call and what was missing.
When international diplomacy is conducted over a telephone call, it's not surprising that both sides might have different interpretations as to what was agreed. And both the White House statement and the Kremlin statement make for an interesting comparison. So this was the White House statement, really quite short. It talked about the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia, something President Trump is very keen on. It talked about a ceasefire on energy and infrastructure in Ukraine and in Russia, as well as technical negotiations on the implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. On the Middle East, it talked about the need to stop proliferation of strategic and nuclear weapons. It said that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel, quite an easy thing for the Russians to agree to. And it talked about the improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia with a huge upside. It said there are enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability to play for. The Kremlin statement, by contrast, was rather longer, and it said lots of things, but let's look at what it said about Ukraine itself. It said that a Ukraine ceasefire must be part of a comprehensive, sustainable and long-term process, a peace deal. In other words, you can't have a ceasefire until you've agreed everything. It talked about the need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis, which in President Putin's mind is everything he's been complaining about for the last 10 years or so. It talked about having effective control over a possible ceasefire along the whole line of contact, which is actually 1,200 kilometres. It talked about the need to stop the Ukrainians continuing to mobilise or to have armed forces in Ukraine or build up their armed forces during a ceasefire. So, in other words, the Ukrainians weren't allowed to improve their position at all. And it called for a complete cessation of foreign military aid and intelligence sharing with Kiev, something that the Russians don't have to do themselves, but they're demanding that the Ukrainians do it. Putin said they would refrain from striking energy infrastructure. Not energy and infrastructure, the way the Americans put it, but energy infrastructure, which means it's a very narrow range of targets. It means that they could still strike military command and control, armoured facilities, civilians. It's only energy infrastructure targets that they've said they will exempt for 30 days. And President Putin said we've responded positively, and he's immediately given the Russian military the corresponding order to carry this out now, tonight. But actually, it doesn't mean a whole lot. In the Black Sea, it was agreed to begin negotiations towards a ceasefire. And if we look at a map of Ukraine, we see what this agreement really hasn't covered, which is a ground force ceasefire. The fact is, President Putin doesn't want a ceasefire on the ground because he's snuffed out the Kursk pocket in the north. He's got maybe 60,000 troops that he can redeploy round to the south and the southeast, and that in 3 or 4 weeks' time could make a real difference. And so as they take their different interpretations away from it tonight, President Trump will say that we've started the process of creating a peace plan. President Putin will know that that peace process will take a long time. And the longer it takes, the better off he thinks he will be on the ground in Ukraine.
Professor Michael Clark there. Well, earlier, while Presidents Trump and Putin were still on the phone, I spoke to the Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, who is the EU's foreign policy chief. I began by asking her take on the US-Russia negotiations so far and if she trusts Vladimir Putin.
We welcome the Jeddah talks and the outcome there. And like Marco Rubio said, the ball is now in Russia's court. So US needs to talk to Russia to understand whether they really want peace or not. I mean, it is important that they talk right now and get the feel whether, Russia is presenting all the conditions and all their ultimate goals, which shows that they don't really want peace, or are they then really agreeing to the ceasefire without conditions.
Do you trust Putin?
No, I don't trust Putin, no. He has shown several times that he can't be trusted, because if you think back, the ceasefires of Minsk, he didn't keep his side of the agreement. So, that's why I think our posture should be a maximum pressure on Russia, that they don't have a choice but to keep to those agreements and also to make sure that they are not doing this again.
Do you trust President Trump?
Well, United States is our long-term ally and friend. We have been really building up NATO for 75 years. Of course, me coming from Estonia, we haven't been in NATO for that long, but still we have done a lot of good things together. So I'm sure that we can build on that relationship.
Do you think if the Russians nibbled at Narva, for example, on the border, that the North Americans under Donald Trump would come to help us? Would the US be there to back, do you think, if there was a small incursion in Estonia?
I'm absolutely certain that they will, because when the only time when Article 5 was actually called was by the United States, and we went there as Estonia to support United States. And by the way, we lost so many soldiers per capita as United States. So we have been great allies. And what I want to stress is that I think there are lower hanging fruits what Russia could test if the aggression pays off in Ukraine. What I want to say that it's actually the question of not only European security, but global security, because there are other aggressors in the world, or would-be aggressors, who are carefully taking notes how the international community really reacts to Russia's war of aggression. If we are not strong enough, then we will see this happening elsewhere as well, because you walk away with more than you had before, and that is extremely dangerous.
Can Europe fight Russia without America? Can Ukraine have peace without US security guarantees?
United States is a very important NATO's ally. It's the most important NATO's ally. That is very clear. And United States has also been a big supporter of Ukraine, but Europeans have done more.
But that was then. We're in a new world now. Now, do you really think the US will offer security guarantees to protect Ukraine if there is a ceasefire or indeed a permanent peace?
We are working towards really presenting, our support to Ukraine, or working on the support that we can give from the European side. And of course, we are also working together with our American allies. I welcome, after the Jeddah talks, that the military aid to Ukraine was resumed by the United States. Also, the sharing of intelligence by the Americans was resumed to Ukraine, which is, which are good developments so that Ukraine can defend itself.
And just one final question. Is Europe at a perilous point in its history? And are we looking at a new world order?
We are definitely in a situation where we need to look how we either save this world order, where we have the international law, where we have the law that protects countries as well as people, or do we move to the world where might makes right? And I think that pours down to our reaction to the aggressors in the world taking what they want. I think we have to be very firm that our principles, the UN Charter, still applies.
Are you optimistic?
We have a lot of good partners around the world that share the same values. And I think right now, seeing or being in this very difficult security situation globally, I think it makes us also find new partners all across the world who share the same values. And that is also could be our strength.
Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief there, speaking to me a little earlier, will also on her agenda Gaza and a barrage of Israeli airstrikes, which has evoked memories of the worst days of the war. Last night's bombardment is said to have killed more than 400 people, shattering the fragile peace brought about by the ceasefire in place since January. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it is only the beginning. Hanging in the balance now is whether the war, which has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, will resume, and the fate of roughly 24 Israeli hostages held by Hamas, who are believed to still be alive. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is in Jerusalem, and a warning that his report does contain distressing images of dead and injured people.
The ceasefire, which held for the best part of 2 months, ended without warning. Israel says that it targeted Hamas officials and infrastructure, but our teams filmed children among the dead and wounded. Many of the images are too graphic to show. This is one of the single deadliest days in Gaza during the war. Bodies were laid outside Gaza hospitals that were mostly destroyed during the war and are struggling to cope again.
So just utter carnage and destruction overnight. I was here in Gaza a year ago during the peak of the fighting in Khan Yunis, and the mass casualties back then looked exactly like the mass casualty that I saw today.
The Israeli airstrikes began shortly after 2 a.m., wave after wave across Gaza, and then backed up by tank artillery and fire from naval ships off the coast.
We were sleeping when suddenly, like a volcanic eruption, the strikes rained down, taking out children.
The Israeli airstrikes and the number of dead continued to rise through the day. During the ceasefire, Gazans had started to rebuild what was left of their lives after more than 15 months of war. But many feared that this moment was inevitable. Israel has issued evacuation orders for parts of Gaza. Palestinians who had returned home in recent weeks are now being forced back to humanitarian zones. Benjamin Netanyahu met with his key security officials hours after he gave the orders to resume the war.
From now on, Israel will take growing actions against Hamas with greater intensity. From now on, negotiations will only be under fire. Hamas has already felt the Israeli strength over the past 24 hours. And I want to promise to you and to Hamas that this is just the beginning.
Outside the Israeli parliament, an anti-government protest gathered to oppose the airstrikes. 59 hostages remain in Gaza, 24 of them thought to be alive.
I think nothing good will come from renewing the war and the fight. Not for the innocent people living in Gaza, not for the hostages there under the tunnels, nothing.
Many Israelis believe that Netanyahu has deliberately collapsed the ceasefire for his own political survival and to ensure that his coalition remains intact.
And it's hard to say whether or not the views expressed here reflect the majority of Israeli views. But a lot of people in Israel, it's safe to say, are quite skeptical about the reasons Israel is returning to fighting.
Hamas hasn't yet carried out counterattacks against Israel. They say they're working with mediators to prevent an escalation. But Israel has said it is ready to increase its attacks. And for now, they have the White House's backing. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Now let us head to news of Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore, barely known outside of astronaut circles when they were strapped in for what was supposed to be a quick test flight to space back last June. Well, tonight the world is watching as they return home from the International Space Station, only 9 months late in a SpaceX capsule. It is set to splash down off the Florida coast at 9:57 p.m. Mission Control, as you can see on standby. But it's already all begun. At 9:11, a 12-minute deorbit burn was due to have started, travelling at 17,500 miles an hour. The idea is for it to slow, to fall, and then get caught in the atmosphere. How do I know all of that? Because our science correspondent Thomas Moore told me, and Thomas is here. And the idea is this is a deorbit burn to slowly enter the Earth's atmosphere, which itself takes about 45 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely right. So they flip the capsule round, so the thrusters are pointing in the direction of travel, and then they fire them up, and that slows down the capsule quite sharply. It then falls, as it slows, it falls into the atmosphere. Of course, the atmosphere becomes increasingly thick the further it falls, so it slows down more. So they build up what's called a ball of plasma around the capsule, where the air actually loses its electrons. It's that high, that hot. It's about 1,600 degrees on the heat shield. It's extraordinary temperatures, but that heat shield does keep the astronauts inside reasonably comfortable.
Yes, comfortable. Looks like an awkward position, of course, but there's 4 of them in there, aren't there? And this was a capsule that headed up with 2 empty seats in order to bring these 2 home, because it was a disastrous test flight, let's be honest with it. Back on June the 5th, went into space, they struggled to dock, helium was leaking. Yep. So start from the beginning, if you can, from June, why this has taken 9 months to get them home.
Well, there was this extraordinary delay while they worked out whether they could fix the leaks on the Boeing Starliner capsule. They tried all kinds of things, and there was hope that they would still return, and then they decided that actually that it wouldn't be safe to do so, and that therefore it returned empty in September. It had to move out the way because this other SpaceX capsule, the Crew Dragon, was on its way up. Every 6 months or so, the crew changes on the International Space Station, and this was a planned crew changeover, so they had to make way. What NASA then came up with, rather than the 4 astronauts that would normally come up, well, Butch and Sonny would stay put. They would have 2 empty seats. In fact, they're custom made. They had to be switched over at the last minute for Butch and Sonny. So up they came, and it has been sitting there for the last 6 months waiting for the ride down.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. So they had expected to be short-term guests on the International Space Station. Yeah. They ended up as long-term crew. What did they do? Experiments and so forth? What was the intention with them?
Well, they rapidly became part of the crew. There's no way that they could have just been hangers-on. That's just not the way the ISS works. They are busy doing science experiments, so they would have to do what the 2 other astronauts who sadly got left behind on Earth, what they had been doing. So Sonny actually did 2 spacewalks. She now is the female astronaut with the 2nd highest number of spacewalks. So for her, it's been great. I mean, she calls this her happy place. And I think most astronauts do have this, what they call an overview effect, just gazing down on planet Earth in wonder against that backdrop of just black nothingness, and that is something that stays with them for life. So they have these mixed feelings about leaving the space station. I'm sure that, you know, who knows when they will be back, but on the other hand, they have been away from their friends and families for an unexpectedly large amount of time.
Yes, I read that Butch is quite a religious man, is an elder in a Baptist church back home in Houston. He says he's used his faith to get through this, the idea that this will make you stronger. So Butch has stayed strong and Sonia stayed happy, which is all good so far, as long as today goes OK, of course. But what happens then, both mentally and physically for them, after so long, you know, without gravity? Yeah,
look, I think we all kind of transfer our feelings to them. We all have had nightmarish travel journeys, delays and all this kind of thing.
It's not quite the same.
No, that's my point. But we can identify it to some extent, that we have missed out on events because we've been stuck on a train or by the side of a road with a car, whatever. But I think you have to bear in mind that these astronauts are selected because of their patience, their resilience. These were Navy test pilots. They would have been trained.
I mean, sorry, look at that shot. What are they watching?
Oh,
is this where they're due to land?
That looks like it could be the plasma that's going on around them, actually.
Wow, I wonder if we go back to that, actually, yeah. So, yeah, just the life of an astronaut as you do this re-entry, this burn.
Yes, so this is quite a ride down. It can be quite bumpy. Certainly was in the Soyuz capsule that Tim Peake came back in. But this, of course, is a slightly different beast. They called it with the Soyuz. They called it a ballistic re-entry, and it was just like they're trying to balance the fall, but also the flight, so it doesn't come straight the way down.
Yes. Well, our coverage will continue shortly. We'll listen also to what Mission Control has to say, but the time. 9:57 is when we are expecting them to splash down off the coast of Florida. So 27 minutes away. We will stay with that. Do stay tuned to The World.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armory. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Well, back now to the return to Earth of Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, who are due to splash down at 9:57 this evening. They were stuck on the International Space Station for 9 months, supposed to be 8 days. With me now is the retired Major General Charles F. Bolden Jr., who served as the 12th NASA administrator, also yourself a former astronaut. I don't know if this brings back memories for you, but, what's the sensation as you start to re-enter Earth's atmosphere?
Actually, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening for your time and early evening my time here in Washington, D.C. Butch and Sonny and the rest of their crew right now are not really feeling that much. As they start to descend through the atmosphere, the pressure, not pressure, but the weight, the feeling of weight will begin to return. And they'll feel more and more like they have. I describe it all the time as a couple of gorillas sitting on your shoulders. So they're weightless when they started the deorbit burn, and then actually all the way to beginning their penetration of the atmosphere. And that weight will increase until they get back fully into the atmosphere, when they'll feel probably about 3 times their normal weight.
Well, that's truly fascinating, isn't it? And none of us will get to experience it. And what about...
You may not. You may. Don't say never.
I'm going to say never for me. We can debate it another time. In terms of how precarious this is, I know the heat shield is coping with, about 1600 degrees as it comes in. I know you were with the Space Shuttle program. Clearly 2 of those spacecraft were lost. So how precarious is a capsule re-entry?
Any re-entry in any vehicle is risky, but it's a measured risk, and it's one that we've evaluated thoroughly. One of the reasons that Butch and Sonny ended up spending 9 months in orbit is because Boeing felt fully confident that their vehicle was good, and it was, as it turned out, when we brought it back. But with the memory of Challenger, STS-51L, and Columbia, STS-107, deeply embedded in the mind of all of us from NASA, that was a risk we were not willing to take. So you decide that, okay, today we're not going to assume that risk. On another day, we may have done that, but not today.
Yeah, safety of astronauts, clearly an absolute priority. You talked about that sensation of weight as you get closer to the Earth's surface. Does it cause damage to the body being in space for so long? And how do you counter it while you're in space?
If we were to go to space and do nothing, there's significant damage to the body in terms of loss of bone mass and loss of muscle mass. The best way I can describe it to you or anybody else, if you've ever had a broken bone and your arm or your leg was put in a cast, and at the end of the 8 weeks or so that you came out of the cast, you were surprised to find out how much your leg or your arm was shriveled up, had actually shrunk. And that's because the muscles do something we call atrophy, and they shrink from lack of use. We don't have that problem in space. If you've ever seen any images from the International Space Station, it's generally of crews on workout equipment, running on a treadmill or on a bicycle ergometer. Every crew member is required to work out an hour a day. So you're in pretty good shape physically when you come back. Whatever we can't take care of on exercise apparatus, we use food supplements, or if absolutely necessary, we actually can turn to some medication or the like. I wear a Fitbit on my arm and an Apple Watch, and that measures everything that I intake into my body. Astronauts, believe it or not, do the same thing, and they log it every night before they go to bed. That goes down to the ground, and overnight while they're sleeping, the flight surgeons and the nutritionists evaluate what their bodies are like and makes a determination as to whether or not they need some supplements added to their meals to get them up in calcium or iron or anything like that. So you come back, you're in pretty good shape with the exception of one noticeable thing, and that's the balance mechanism, the neurovestibular system. We know what's up and down based on our inner ear. With the lack of the gravity vector in space, the inner ear stops working. And when it hasn't worked for 6 months, and all of a sudden you turn it back on and ask it a question, it's dumbfounded. It doesn't have a clue because it's not accustomed to having a gravity vector anymore. And that takes anywhere from a couple of days to maybe a week, depending on the particular astronaut.
How many times a day does the International Space Station orbit planet Earth? And as you're looking down on it, what do you think of our wondrous planet?
It's absolutely breathtaking, and I know, and it's awesome. And those are all inadequate to describe what it's like. But we go around Earth once every 90 minutes at 20. Somebody's going to have to help me here. We travel. I'm going to talk English, not English. I'm going to talk American. So we travel at 17,500 miles an hour. I think that's about 23,000 kilometers an hour, or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Miles. You're fine with us in the UK. You carry on as you are.
Okay, so that's 16 times every normal Earth day you go around Earth. Once every 90 minutes is an orbit. That means that you're on the side away from the sun for about 45 minutes. You're on the side with the sun for about 45 minutes. So in a normal Earth day, we all see the sunrise and set 16 times every normal Earth day. Absolutely breathtaking every time you see it. And each one is unique in its own way because you're over a different part of Earth on each orbit. So the sunrise in some cases may be full of colors because you're out over an area where the sun's kind of coming at you through a lot of sand and dust and stuff in the atmosphere that bounces off Earth. So it's just breathtaking every time you see it.
So what happens now? Splashdown off the coast of Florida expected at 57 minutes past this hour. You know, what are the astronauts doing in the capsule and what will we see?
Well, the crew is about 15 minutes, as you said, 17 minutes from touchdown right now. They are beginning to feel heavy. They've been feeling heavy now for probably 5 or 6 minutes, well, depending on whether this is their first flight or whatever. But they're beginning to really feel heavy now. Their arms were up like mine right now, just kind of dangling up there because they were weightless. Over time, their arms have gradually been pulled down by the onset of gravity. And right now, Butch and Sonny, because they're going to have to move some controls maybe. They're doing isometric exercises. They're patting their feet. They're doing all kinds of stuff to get their muscles alert and alive because, again, without gravity, they just haven't been doing the normal kind of earthly things. So they're trying to get themselves ready to do manual tasks that they'll have to do once they touch down.
They're about to go into a comms blackout. I feel like we're in Apollo 13 at the moment, but clearly not. But, is that all part of the course? Just very, very quickly, why would that be?
Your guest earlier talked about plasma around the vehicle because of it's coming down through the atmosphere, and the molecules are striking the vehicle. So if you talk like you're talking to some elementary school kids or kids in grade school or kindergarten, rub your hands together and you can see how friction causes it to heat up. Imagine you're a spacecraft coming back through our atmosphere, being bombarded by particles at 17,000 miles an hour. It gets really hot. So in Fahrenheit, we're talking about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside. That creates this plasma that he was talking about. It's a glowing sheath around us. And until we get deep down into the atmosphere. And then the vehicle begins to gradually cool down again and it stabilizes on the outside. But that's the glow that you see right now in their windows. It may very well be the glow from some of the plasma around them in the vehicle. And it's multicolored and you see all kinds of weird stuff as it separates from, it contacts the vehicle and then fires off. It's just interesting.
I can tell you miss it. I really can.
I miss it a lot.
You live vicariously through Sonny and Butch like the rest of us.
I do, and I'll be just like everybody else, asking them tons of questions when I see them next.
Exactly that. Well, do pass them on to us, won't you? Major General Charles F. Bolden Jr., it's been an absolute pleasure, truly fascinating to listen to you. Thank you very much indeed. We are keeping abreast of this re-entering into the atmosphere, splashdown shortly, back very shortly with more.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Well, welcome back. You are watching our coverage of the last stages of the return to Earth for two stuck astronauts, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore. A 17-hour journey started very early this morning, did it not? Let's talk more then to our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. And let's just very quickly on them. Both of them were test pilots, weren't they? Suni, a helicopter pilot by trade, Butch, a fighter pilot, combat pilot, both military and skilled people, well able to deal with the traumas that they've had, which is one, a very difficult docking to the International Space Station originally, and then being stuck there for so long, Thomas.
Yeah, this is the first flight of the Boeing Starliner capsule with humans on board, and it didn't go to plan, and they got through that. They then had to deal with the whole business of, well, you're not going home when you thought you were going home, and you could be here for quite some time. Now, they pushed back against the narrative that they were stranded in any way, that they were taking this in their stride, that they planned to come short, but we prepared to go long, is what they said. So this is something that astronauts, I guess, are built to deal with, and they are special humans because of that. They are selected for spaceflight for very special personality traits.
And had to deal with a bit of a political tug of war of this as well. Why did it become so political?
Yeah, it became a bit of a political maelstrom, and this was President Trump who said that they had been virtually abandoned by the Biden administration, which Biden, of course, denied. And he then, President Trump, said that they were going to rescue these astronauts and they were sending a capsule to do so. Now, this doesn't stack up. This capsule had been bolted to the side of the space station for the last 6 months. This isn't a rescue mission. It's part of the routine 6-monthly changeover of crews. But it has become vitriolic, and they have felt uncomfortable being caught up in this political maelstrom. It's just not where astronauts would feel comfortable being.
And it is also the tale of contrasting successes for two private companies entering the space race, in a sense to replace NASA and state funding, although they are both state-funded, I suppose. NASA hired SpaceX and Boeing after the shuttle program ended to have two competing US companies to transport astronauts to and from the space station until it is abandoned in 2030, and itself has a fiery re-entry, I read, having been up there for 3 decades. There's been one winner in this space race between private companies, is there not?
NASA awarded contracts to both Boeing and SpaceX at the same time, and yet SpaceX is now on its 10th commercial flight of crew to the space station. Boeing is still on the starting blocks, struggling to work out how to fix the problems with its capsule. It is catastrophic for Boeing, both in space and, of course, they've had problems with their aeroplanes as well. It's not a good time for that company. And there have been rumours that they will perhaps jettison the space division, that they just don't see the value. It's too much risk, too much money, and that they don't want to be there anymore.
It is really fascinating to see these pictures beamed from space. We're about to end the comms blackout, which we heard about there because of the plasma dancing in colours, as we heard from our former astronaut. And we will then listen to mission control, in fact, as they get nearer. But, oh, there we go. We're starting to look up into the skies, are we not, to try to identify them. So what pictures will we be looking at from the outside of this landing capsule, Thomas?
So there will be chase planes who are high in the atmosphere with very powerful telescopes, and you can see there the shimmer of the plasma surrounding the capsule as it comes down. That is so hot. The heat shield reaches a temperature of about 1,600 degrees Celsius, and at that temperature, the electrons are stripped away from the air molecules, and it is just a ball of plasma, these supercharged particles that astronauts always talk about as completely mesmerising, but obviously very, very, very dangerous. It is that heat shield that is keeping them safe.
Yes, fingers crossed clearly. And we know the heat shield was one of the difficulties of the space shuttle, ultimately leading to its demise as well. This is images from one of those high-altitude planes, Thomas, that you spoke about. So let's listen then to the commentary as we enter the final stages of 9 months up in space for these two astronauts.
All right, we're going to start hearing the SpaceX crew operations resource engineer.
SpaceX Freedom is with you. 4.16. Enjoying the ride.
Copy that, Freedom.
Great news there from Commander Nick Hague reporting back.
We see a healthy flight computer. Expect automated chute deployment.
Freedom copies.
Like we said before, things moving very quickly as Dragon Freedom makes its way home. Next event coming up will be deployment of the drogue parachutes. This occurs around 18,000 feet.
GPS has converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deployment.
We're about 2 minutes away from deployment of those drogue parachutes. Now the heat shield is continuing to work to slow the vehicle down. That entry period, the Dragon spacecraft went from orbital velocity about 17,500 miles per hour down to about 350 miles per hour. So that really gives you a sense of why that plasma builds up on the exterior of the capsule, thanks to the heat shield and the work that it does. Those drogue parachutes will slow it down from 350 to about 119 miles per hour. We can see
15 kilometers. Brace for drogue window.
We can see seat rotation happening inside the capsule. Great to get those first views of our crew members. Once again, the capsules are going about 350 miles per hour when the drogues are deployed. Those drogue parachutes that we manufacture here in-house are going to slow the spacecraft down to 119 miles per hour. And that is when we will see the main parachutes deploy, and that occurs about 6,000 feet above the ocean's surface.
And we are expecting drogue deployment at 2:53 p.m. Pacific, so we should see it any second now. And there you are getting a great view of Crew 9 inside Dragon Freedom as it returns back to Earth. We are awaiting the drogue deploys. This view coming from the WB-57 high-altitude plane. And there you see it on your screen, drogue deployment.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
You can hear the crowd here.
Visual on 2 healthy drogues.
The crowd here very excited as Dragon Freedom continues to make its way back to planet Earth.
Next up, we'll stand by for the main deployment of the parachutes. The mains are quite a bit larger. You'll be able to notice the difference on your screen once they deploy, and they continue to ensure that the Dragon spacecraft slows down even further. As we mentioned, Freedom will be traveling 16 miles per hour when it splashes down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, here at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. And there we go.
We have visual on 4 healthy mains.
That view was from inside.
Freedom copy.
That view was from inside one of the buckets where the parachutes are located. So we see a great view there of the reefing on those parachutes. And as those main parachutes begin to inflate fully, 4 beautiful, healthy mains. Now awaiting visuals of splashdown.
Freedom, 1,000.
We'll start to hear Commander Nick Hague.
Copy, 1,000.
As we heard right there, Commander Nick Hague will be calling out the altitude of the Dragon capsule from here on out. Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. You can see those parachutes continuing to slow the Dragon capsule down.
And if you're just joining us, You're looking at
800 meters.
A live view of Crew 9, just minutes away from splashing down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Splashdown 2 minutes from now at 2:57 p.m. Pacific. We do have 4 healthy mains really doing the job there. Just breathtaking views of a calm, glass-like ocean off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Crew 9 just minutes away from splashing down.
This is really such an incredible shot. That
Copy, 600.
That was a live view from our recovery vessel, Megan, which is stationed a couple miles away from the splashdown site. We can see the crew there using their restraints as resting places for their arms. They were just in space moments ago, so their arms were able to float freely.
400 meters.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew 9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown. Crew 9 back on Earth.
And SpaceX Freedom, splashdown. Good main release.
Copy, splashdown. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sunny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.